There we go.
There we go.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, everybody.
So today we're going to finish up our talk that we had last week, and I asked ChatGPT for a group of 5 people wearing green shirts and one wearing purple. What does this kind of say to you, Yvonne?
Well, I'd have to say that, that kind of one of these things is not like the other is something that I think we grew up with. That 5 of these things are kind of the same. And the story goes that, sometimes if somebody stands out as being different, perhaps in this case, the purple t-shirt versus the green t-shirts, that's an issue where we might have to think about things like, hey, we got diversity in our group here. Not everybody's the same. We want to make sure that what ends up happening is there's equity, not necessarily equality. Sometimes that's something that people talk about, the difference between equality and equity, but that's equity correct. Being something where we're really looking at, hey, so if we were going to be working together on something, we want to make sure that things are divvied up in a way that makes sense for the strengths that people have, for example. So maybe the person in the purple t-shirt is a little different. Maybe this is a person that does back-end development where the others are front-end development, and we can think about that. And then of course inclusion, because sometimes maybe if we think about the way that we're doing things, we're actually leaving people out, and that's something that I think is easy to do because we're pretty focused on ourselves.
Right. So instead of calling ourselves the green shirt people, what if we were to call ourselves the people who wear shoes?
Then we've got some green and some pink and some brown and some, we've got a lot more variety going on there. There's still maybe some predominance of green.
But we've taken the color out of the equation. It's just you're wearing shoes.
True that, but they're all wearing shirts too.
That's true. Or all the people that are wearing shirts.
All the people that are wearing shirts.
So we talked a little bit about the Code of Ethics, the ACM's Code of Ethics. It kind of goes from us being interested about the public. So let's kind of walk through it. So the first one is software engineers shall consistently act with public interest. And last class we talked about, it's not clearly defined what public interest is.
Really?
But that's what we really want people to, that's what we want to think about.
Yeah, and I think, when it became public interest in the context of capitalistic societies that have responsibilities for stakeholders in large companies, it actually becomes kind of complicated.
Yeah, well, and at the end of the last lecture, you brought up the idea that we don't all have to work for capitalistic corporations. There's another group of people called NGOs and not-for-profit that are actually trying to do this, and so they are actually, their focus is the public interest. Yeah. But also, we are seeing that with all of the things that are changing in the world, companies are starting to realize that with the level of information that exists and the publicity and stuff like that, that they will be penalized if they're not acting in public interest.
Yeah, I think we heard somebody in the class say corporate social responsibility, CSR, right. Absolutely.
So the first thing is everybody, we have to take care of everybody. And then it brings it in a little bit closer, says you're working for your employer.
Yeah.
And you have to look after your client and your employer. But notice that it put number 1, the public interest, and secondly, the client and the employer. Now, what's interesting, these are a code of ethics. It's also tenets, like rules for behavior.
Yeah. And
there's conflict already because I mean, something may be in the interest of the public interest, but I'll get fired.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. We've seen that pretty publicly, what can happen in those kinds of cases. So yeah, this is definitely a complex equation.
So, okay, so let's go to the next one down. What if the product, so you tell me to build this product, but I know it's bad for the client. Never mind the general public. Is there more? Did we just introduce another layer of conflict?
I think we did. I mean, ultimately, it sort of seems aligned with what would be right for the client there. But there's also something that, that you could introduce something that isn't quite right for the client, like you said, and yet might be aligned or not aligned with public interest. So layer upon layer upon layer.
You want another layer?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so your product is something that's going to harm the public.
Oh,
But-
man.
So now your judgment, software engineers shall maintain integrity and independence in their professional judgment. So I've asked you to write code that's going to sniff the packets on the Wi-Fi and get people's credit cards.
Oh, wow. You actually asked me to do that,
Yeah.
did you? Yeah. Wow. And you're my employer and you're
I
going
am
to
your
fire
employer.
me if I
Yeah.
don't do
And
it.
we're going to deploy this. Well, we're not going to use the credit cards, but we're going to track what
Right.
credit cards they have.
Okay. We're just
So that we could,
collecting
we could
data.
advertise like Visa versus MasterCard. If we see a lot of people don't have MasterCard, we could advertise MasterCard in
Yeah.
that stadium.
We could
Where's the other?
understand that that's actually something that would be convenient to have something that applies to most people that we're seeing on our network. There's lots of ways in which you could convince me that this could be a good thing for us to do.
There's no way I can convince you this is a good way to do it.
Because there are ways to actually obfuscate some of the data.
Oh, we're going to sort it.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so software engineer managers. So up until now, we've been talking about software engineers. Now we're talking about the organization that they live in. The management of software engineers shall also follow these rules,
Yeah.
right? And that's important because we just talked about, I was your manager and asked you to do something,
Yeah.
but I'm supposed to follow
All of
these
a
rules
sudden,
too.
yeah,
Oh,
all of a
darn.
sudden you're the one that's responsible for some of these really bad decisions that we might be making.
And the next one, which is software engineers shall advance the integrity and reputation of the profession consistent with public interest.
That circles around.
It circles around. It goes back to the THERAC 25, right? Because there was no testing. And as engineers, we are advocating testing.
Well, and I think the group brought up a really good point that, hey, there's got to be some things where hardware is involved, maybe,
Right.
and that's where it becomes ethics.
And this is the software engineers shall advance the integrity and reputation. So there was a software engineer in the past that killed some people.
Yeah.
And we are advancing our profession such that we now ask for lots of tests.
Yeah. Yeah.
Software engineers shall be fair to and supportive of their colleagues. We'll talk about this in the context of code reviews and also later when we talk about how to behave as a team and how to give feedback.
Do you think generally software engineers have a reputation of being fair and supportive?
In general, yes, I think so. I think in general, people are like that, but there's always, there are difficult conversations that we need to have, which is, hey, Yvonne, your code sucks.
Yeah.
Or, hey, Yvonne, I see what you're trying to do. Maybe there's a better way of doing it.
And even,
which one of those made you feel more comfortable?
Yeah, well, I certainly like the idea that you're giving me the opportunity to defend what I did there. But I also feel like even in that bugged report list of things, at the bottom it said be kind.
Yeah.
I think there is, in my very academic, not based in industry view, feedback that I get on the type of exchanges that sometimes might be a little more, can be taken as a personal attack. Maybe in the spirit of a good debate, it's like, your code sucks. No, it doesn't. Your code sucks. Sometimes that can be a fun way to have an exchange. But I think
there has to be a level of trust.
Yeah, and I think, and respect and new people in the workplace, and especially in the context of diversity, I think it can, some groups may gel on that kind of level, and then other groups would actually perceive it as a toxic workplace. And we got lots of feedback on toxic workplaces.
So here's an actual example that happened. I had a senior engineer, and they were from a culture that was very direct. And I had another junior engineer, and they were from a much more fluid culture.
Yeah.
And the junior engineer wrote some code and submitted it for a code review.
Yeah.
And the senior engineer, who was from this very direct culture, wrote, "This code makes my eyes bleed."
Yeah.
And that's all they wrote.
Yeah.
And I, as a manager, had to go with the number 4 there. I had to go talk to this engineer from the very direct culture and say, you know, I get that you don't like the code, but how is the junior engineer, how are they supposed to learn?
Yeah.
And how are they supposed to not make your eyes bleed? give them a little bit more context.
Well, and that's it. In these bug reports, code reviews, pull requests, communication that is clear, based on evidence, fact, not some kind of superlative, not some kind of emotional, not some kind of physical. Yeah. It's really about details associated with the technology, nothing else.
Yeah.
But when we're having a lot of fun, and sometimes, that's unfortunately doesn't translate between cultures sometimes with what humor is and that kind of thing, we can come up with all sorts of things. And that, maybe was intended to just kind of have a, whoa, let's redo this kind of feel. But
no,
yeah.
they were not doing that. They were,
okay,
they were being super seriously bad. They thought the code was beneath them and that
they wouldn't
even read it.
Okay.
So
I've certainly seen people react like that in organizations, and junior engineers learning from that experience in a way that maybe is a little bit more about how to handle that personality.
Right, yeah.
Because that personality is a specific personality type. Not all managers are like that. Not all feedback is like that. But there are some people who are consistently like that, and they're part of your organization. Yeah. Oh, self. We missed self, I think.
Oh, we
at
did.
The end.
You're
self.
right. And yeah, so the one thing I like about, I like lots of things about this, probably about 8 of them. I like that it puts us as engineers as servants to all of these other principles. We're looking after the whole world, our employer, and our own career growth. And that's the last part, is that we are expected to continue to learn. Our craft, our trade continues to get better, and the tools that we have available to us are better. And we need to learn how to use them such that we can satisfy all of these other things.
I think that's why when you brought in a lot of use of more recent tools that are out there, it makes it very interesting, because I think that starts to change some of these equations in interesting ways that if we don't prepare for it, we're not ready.
So these slides are available, so you can go click on this. There is now this voluntary product accessibility template that is being demanded by many companies. It's called the VPAT.
Yeah.
VPAT 2, and you pay companies thousands of dollars to go through your entire website and send a report. And so if we go, should we risk going to it?
Sure, let's do it, because it is very cool. And I know that often slides and stuff that I post on Canvas get rated in ways that I'm not in the green arrow, I'm in the red arrow. So, a lot of that has to do with accessibility.
Here it is. So this is a report that was done for a company, but it's very extensive, as you can see. It's got 31 pages, and what they've gone through is they go through a whole bunch of, so the consistent identification, and there'll be documentation for it, and it says, and then you get a report. It says it's either supports it or it's not applicable. And then there'll be comments here. For example, in this particular case, the focus visible, level AA, supports with exceptions, and then you get a report here, and then it'll be up to the developer to go in and read that and try to understand how it does that. And then you also have to make a decision as to whether that's important enough that you want to do it. But the last company I was with was Staffbase. We had a contract with Microsoft for our product, and we had to get a VPAT with 0 exceptions for the contract to be signed by Microsoft.
Wow.
And it's expensive. We had 32 engineers, and we spent 22 weeks full-time fixing this.
Wow.
And but we had to do it.
Comes back around to lots of the observations that people were making about the Domino's story and what it would have cost to make the website good for screen readers, people with low vision or visual disabilities, accessibility issues. Oh, sorry, that was Domino's there. So that we can't maybe put our finger on how much it would cost to do it all the time, but this is a step in that direction.
Yeah, and there's other ways of measuring your thing. There's a WeJag. I think that's a little bit older, but there are tools that allow you to, it's hard for us who are sighted to know whether our website is good for people who are handicapped there, for people, if we have audio and you can't hear, et cetera, et cetera. But there are companies who make a business of helping you understand what your website is, and they'll tell you exactly what you need to fix.
Absolutely. And it's evolving. I think that's the other thing, is that we're all getting up to speed on all of these things, and how, maybe even in the development of your personas, you think about accessibility issues.
So, and diversity and inclusion has all sorts of historical connotations, and a lot of it is about language. And I want to talk about 3 or 4 examples of terms that were acceptable when we studied computer science that now, because of historical context, we're not using anymore, right? And these should be most of them are fairly obvious. The first one is master server and slave server. There is recent history within the United States that involves slavery. And therefore, we have agreed as a society that we're not going to do that. We're going to change it with what would you use instead of master slave?
Yeah, you know what? With our distributed systems course, we talk about having a coordinator or some kind of
a worker.
A main program, that kind of thing. I think what's interesting though is you still will see this out there.
Oh yeah.
But I think it's nice to think about how you might see it, but reframe it yourself, even though in a discussion with someone, it might be right in front of you that's what it's saying, and you're saying, oh, well, I've got the coordinator node and then the worker node here, or something like that. Even in so many things in systems, it's very hard because the language is it's quite violent. Kill all.
Kill all, yeah.
Kill all, especially when it refers to child processes. It's like, wow, that was harsh.
Yeah. This is actually also impacting the car industry, because the brakes used to have a master cylinder and slave cylinders, so it also impacts them there. Here's another one: whitelist, blacklist.
Yeah.
Right. We have a web service. So what is a whitelist and a blacklist?
Yeah, unfortunately, I certainly have seen the terms a lot, and I think that when I've thought about them, they're kind of listing the things that are okay in the whitelist,
the white ones, yeah,
and the not okay, it's the ones that are blacklisted.
And so it turns out that the history of this comes from early labor, right after the emancipation in the U.S., where people were blacklisted from working. That means they weren't allowed to work, and the primary reason was that they were black.
Yeah.
And so we don't have that. Now, in countries like that don't have that recent history with slavery, this may not be such an issue. But we are we respect the history of the United States and the reconciliation that they're trying to go through. So we, as a community of computer scientists around the world, have all gone, okay, it doesn't matter what we call it. So allow list, deny list. When I was at Amazon, we actually had a project where we changed every single piece of code within Amazon to go from whitelist and blacklist to allow list and deny list.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, all internal.
And I wonder if other cultures have different terms too that are evolving as well.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
One of your favorites.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you call a group of people that are talking about one topic?
Manel.
A manel.
Instead of a panel.
And do you go to manels anymore?
You know what? I actually try to make it a practice of always, making the topic the number one thing. But organizations that don't take into account diversity often don't get my own thing, my own personal endorsement. So yeah, I tend to sort of want to draw attention to in discussions about, hey, maybe in your organization, there are a diverse set of people who talk about the things that you guys want to talk about. Right. When I say guys, that's another example, but, and just bringing awareness to it. So yeah, I kind of have a thing about this one.
What about brown bag lunch? Can we have brown bag lunches?
You know what? I honestly, I came across this once in my life about this issue. But I never associated it with when I was using the term brown bag
Right.
lunch, never.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it was used as a test of whether you could enter something. If your skin was darker than this brown bag, you could get in. But I don't think, without that historical reference, it's not offensive because there's people taking brown bags into lunch.
Yeah.
And so I think in countries that practice probably didn't happen in Colombia or didn't happen in other places. So this is one where people are divided on it. There's some people that are really adamant that says, no, that particular practice was bad, and therefore the term brown bag is bad. But if you have a bag and it's brown, anyways, the reason why this is the last one is not all of these things are clear cut.
No, and definitely all of them are tied. I think we did master slave and we did whitelist, blacklist, and are tied to the racial history of the United States with white and black people. And I think that if we go like closer to home with Canadian history and thinking about what kinds of terms we probably have, what kind of logos and things that we use with our Indigenous history, which probably has a lot of things that we're going to have a whole different set of slides next year that are referring to different things that are referring to different cultural issues.
There are standards. We talked about the VPAC before, and there's a whole bunch of things. If you end up in a company where you don't see a standard being used for accessibility for your software, you can push for it, and you're actually adding value to your company.
Oh, totally.
Unless you work for Domino's, in which case you probably want to quit.
Well, and I think the big thing is, the students that we're working with right now are the stakeholders now. They're the generation that will be deciding what they're investing in and what they're not investing in. And I think that this generation of stakeholders is going to drive corporate social responsibility in very different ways. I think maybe COVID had a lot to do with that. The world shut down. Everything was different. Now you can reflect on a lot of things and sort of think about how we're going to make the future better. And a lot of power is in the hands of stakeholders, and our students are the future stakeholders.
So we talked about a little bit about this last class. This is a reminder. Here are some of the questions for which you may not have answers, but you want to ask. How will my software fail? Is your software going to fail and put the address of some poor couple because you made a bad decision and you're giving data when you have no data?
Yeah.
What is the implication of that failure? Who will use my software? If you're working for MaxMind, think about it. Are the police going to use my software, and are they going to go after people at this IP address?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Exactly. How will my software impact those who do not use it directly? I don't think the couple that lived on that farm used MaxMind.
Nope.
But there was a whole bunch of other people that impacted them.
Yeah.
And will my software amplify negative behavior for users and society at large? MaxMind, I don't know about that, but definitely we can dig into. There's an example coming up that really shows how this is it ended up being a problem.
Yeah, I think all of the again, the examples that we were just looking at in terms of white and black racial issues, that's one dimension to think about things. But there are so many other dimensions, and I think the students brought a lot of them up when they were presenting on the ethical situations that we went over last time.
More about public interest. Can my software make people's job easier? We talked about ChatGPT and the conflict that we have with it's costing a lot of energy to make it work, but you as students said, yeah, we want ChatGPT, we want Copilot, we want it because it's got, is my software going to make people happier? When I emigrated from England to Canada, it cost a lot of money to call home.
Yeah.
But now it's free so now my aunt who's 90 years old calls me every Saturday and we chat for nothing. So it makes my life happier.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Can my software amplify positive behavior for users and society at large? We've seen lots of examples where people have broken a story or they've celebrated something. communication is better, and how are is your software? I mean, again, the greater public interest. How are you making the world better?
Yeah, I think a lot of people said that's what they want to do. And then I didn't mean to do too much of a divide between corporations and not-for-profits, but it's an easy way to do it. But within corporations, there's so many ways that you can look at these questions and go, okay, I'm working on this small thing for this big company, but I can think about ramifications of decisions that I'm making for this small thing in a bigger equation. And that's what this is all about.
Yep.
You do have reach to public interest when you're building products.
So here are some of the things that bigger issues to think about. We won't dwell on them, but there is this book there, Value Sensitive Design, and basically human rights, inalienable, accessibility, justice, privacy, human welfare. And we covered all of these in the examples that we had.
Yeah.
The human welfare was the THERAC 25.
Yeah. And students brought up more.
Yeah.
I feel like when you guys dug into the issues, these kinds of things were the level at which I heard the assessments going down at, which is very cool.
Social media platforms. I remember around 2006 when Facebook started. It's hard to think that there was a world before Facebook, but and I remember when my students I was at Carnegie Mellon at the point, so my students were early access because it was all the students, and they showed it to me, and I'm like, oh, goody, I'm going to give away all of my information so that they can make money. And then and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it. And I've specifically made a point of putting very little personal information on Facebook.
Yeah.
Right. That was a decision that I made.
Me too.
But it has become a very strong force in our culture.
Oh, sure.
Now, have you heard about the Myanmar Facebook thing?
Yeah, a little bit, but I'd like to know more. I never actually went and got myself a Facebook account.
Okay.
That's how old I am.
Yeah. So Myanmar is a fairly closed country with a fairly bad government. I think that's a good summary, right?
Sure.
And it's dysfunctional. And there's a majority. There's two groups of people within that country. There's the majority, so they elect the government, and then there's a minority that the majority doesn't like. And so Facebook provided free basics in Myanmar. So free basic service allowed you to use the internet without paying for data. So there was an agreement between the government-owned telecom and Facebook that if people used Facebook, they wouldn't have to pay for data.
Wow.
So it's great. You get Facebook and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The problem was that there was no other, you couldn't go to any other websites other than Facebook.
Right.
And the government controlled most of the feeds on that. And it turned into a venue for hate against the minority.
Yeah.
And so, this decision back here, freedom versus regulation, amplify hate speech, spread misinformation, because it was given to people as here's your internet, but there was kind of this other thing there. I don't think Facebook intended for it to be used this way.
Unintended consequences.
Unintended consequences, right? And it did allow people to build communities. It did spread information, not so much. It did spread misinformation and disinformation, and it did amplify hate speech.
Yeah.
Sorry, so it's two sides of that sword. So where does this leave us? So I would like to sleep tonight.
Yeah, I know. I feel like we have a long list of things we got to be able to do, but I do feel like the people in the room in the class have really showed us that they're in there wanting to do this list. Definitely the considerations that they brought up when discussing the issues were broader than I had first considered. So I really appreciated that. I think there's broad thinking. I think the ways in which our software is interacting politically and in economic systems came up quite a bit. The best practices that we've talked about today, I think, are the big issues that we have to think about and that we're working within, and that all of those layers. I think we said to encourage diversity in the teams that they were choosing. And I think that really, when it gets out into the workplace, you're the one who could comment on this more. They have no control over which team they're maybe ending up in so much. They can certainly apply to work with teams, but teams are divided by roles.
By product. So it depends on the size of your company.
Okay.
So at a small company like Relic, where we had 56 engineers and 3 products, the movement of any engineer from one team to another could seriously impact the team that they were leaving.
Right.
A company like Amazon, where there's like 27,000 engineers or more, they made a decision a long time ago, in order to protect their engineers, that engineers can decide what team they want to go to.
Mm-hmm.
So I cannot be held back from leaving, but so basically I can go and apply for a job internally. If they accept me, I can't be held back.
Nice.
Right?
Yeah.
So there is that. The larger, and I think Microsoft and Google operate in the same way. I believe Facebook as well. I don't think X acts that way, since they cut half of their engineers anyways.
I can't imagine how busy they are. But yeah.
But basically, you do get to. It depends so much. But then you have the situation, if you're in a smaller company, you have a more powerful voice, because you're 1 out of 40, whereas at Amazon you may be 1 out of 26,000, but you have local influence, right?
Right.
So it really is act locally, think globally, but act locally. Right. And that's kind of the only way we can survive. And it's the same thing if you're working for an NGO.
Oh, yeah.
Because NGOs are not perfect.
Oh, and NGOs, there's a lot of all hands on deck activity, I think is the.
And we've heard stories of like NGOs or not-for-profits that there was that big scandal about, a big story a while back about Girl Guides and how much the CEO was making.
Yeah.
And it's a not-for-profit, but obviously not making a profit.
People make salaries.
Yeah,
People make big salaries. I think one thing that is an interesting metric when we think about diversity is to look at the diversity in the organization that you're going to. And sometimes this is broken down quite publicly. Mm-hmm. Racial, gender, that kind of thing is available for different organizations. And we can see that a lot of them are quite homogenous in mm-hmm. terms of how many people are of one demographic in these organizations, which means that, it is that much more exciting to think about coming diversity issues mm-hmm. in the context of those large organizations when everyone's trying to accomplish this because they know it can make a better team.
Yeah, and we do know. I guess I'm picking my daughter up.
Yes, we do know that. Yeah. We do know that everyone in the class has shown how they can engage in these conversations, these honest conversations with coworkers. Obviously, we haven't gone into difficult zones yet, but we have these stand-up meetings, and there will be disagreements when we're trying to pick a best paper award. Believe me, we're going to have some issues that we don't have the same opinion on. Not ethical issues, but still how we have those kinds of conversations are the big ones. Yeah.
Okay, I'm not picking her up.
Yeah,
Mike's picking her up. That's very, very good. On the final project, there's going to be a large, there's going to be a very ambiguous brief. Nice. And as a team, you're going to have to agree on what you're doing.
Yeah.
And that's where we're building these teams. And as I said, we will talk about team building and working in team and giving feedback at a future issue. But really, even if you're on a team where everybody kind of looks the same, people are different.
Oh yeah,
there's people that have very blunt opinions. There's those people that don't want to speak, and you have to go, Yvonne, what's your? So this is the problem I have with you all the time.
How do you really feel about it?
This is the problem I have with you, Yvonne. I always have to get you to talk.
I know.
Okay. So basically. We'd like you to understand how you can just explain the ways in which developers of software often differ from the users of the software. And we've talked about it. So we're very technical people. And a very, very good example of this is the GitHub webpage.
Oh, that is good.
And the GitHub webpage is designed by engineers for engineers, but it's horrible.
Well, it's definitely, you know, if you're
very practical.
Very practical. But when you're trying to describe to people we were talking about the other day, the two uses of the word pull. I mean, a lot of people would go, wow, don't you think you could have called it something else? But no.
Right.
So yeah.
So Yvonne talked about personas last lecture, and you're building software hopefully for thousands of people, and so there are. We talked about bias as well, and we are not the users. So I am really good at computer science. I understand how systems work, so I can deal with things like VI and Emacs and Git and DD and all of that stuff, but I'm not like the people that I write software for. And so here's basically a visualization of Yvonne was talking earlier about this data is publicly available as to what is the population look like within these companies. So the US population is roughly 51% female, and there isn't a single company on this list that has achieved 51. The only one that's close is Indiegogo.
Oh, and Pandora, is that right?
49. Okay, they're close, yeah. So I'd say anyway, but you can see that. And then you have white versus non-white, white percentage. So 61% of the population is white, and you see that there's a lot of companies that have more than 61% of their employees being white, like HP. So they're definitely biased in terms of hiring white people. 6% of the population in the U.S. is Asian. There's a large percentage of people there, so I think the Asian population is well represented in some of these companies, overrepresented. Latino is very underrepresented. Anyways, as Yvonne was saying, this data is available, and you can look at it when you're applying for jobs and see, is this the kind of culture I want to be in?
Well, and this is like, this is 5 years old.
Yeah.
Sorry, 6 years old.
Yeah.
So believe me, things have changed, but some things haven't changed. And even the way, question some of this data in terms of what it's representing. Are these really engineers, or are they counting HR?
I think it's the total employees
in the company.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of females in HR and a lot of males in engineering. So this would shift these numbers. Yeah. If you look at the scary thing at the bottom there, the top 50 US companies, look at the white.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a very interesting thing to be communicating on this slide, and thinking about it now, and thinking the way this data is collected. There's lots of things to learn from data, and I think we have to continually look at data and ask questions.
Yep, exactly.
Just exactly like our students do.
This one here, we did not include this in the first one, but this was Google had biased data. They didn't have enough black people in their image database. The only black things that looked like humans were gorillas.
And that's, this is very consistent with what Joy found in her research, which is much more recent than this. So yeah, lots of things in here for us to take away from, and to remember from past mistakes, how we want to be able to move things over into the future, and what AI is going to bring to us for new challenges.
Right. And so one of the things that I think we're going to ask you to do the following as an assignment that we will discuss in class. We'd like each one of you to independently find a situation where you think there is bias in software.
Oh, yeah.
And then in the class, we're going to, again, put you in groups of 4, and you guys are going to do the same exercise that you did last week, where you're going to each of you say, I think this is an example of bias in software, and then you're going to talk about one or two of those as a team.
Oh, yeah. That's great.
Cool.
Yeah.
So what do we got?
Gender mag.
Yeah, gender mag right there. What is gender mag?
So it was kind of this approach. We talked about personas, and it turns out that a lot of times when engineering teams were trying to make personas, without really trying to be inclusive, they actually were designing for, and maybe if we go back to that previous slide, the guy in the top, that was kind of who they had in mind, and they didn't think of these people at the bottom was kind of the thing. And so, and again, this is just a gender example, but there, you know, you can think of so many different dimensions of society, and like you said, you know, what we look like may be one way to differentiate us, but there's all sorts of things about where we come from and where we live and all those things. So this is just an example of making sure that you were developing software based on personas that were highly inclusive. And definitely, I heard Margaret Burnett, I think is her name, or Barnett. She came and she gave a talk at one of the places I was at, and it was really interesting. And it actually spurred a lot of discussion around personas and around our inability to do a good job of identifying personas. We really have to think about it. And I think you mentioned at Amazon, you actually had a list.
Yeah.
And that would help a lot because there's a lot of things that we don't think of. And so that's the whole point, is that we all have our unconscious bias. We don't realize that we're applying it.
Yeah. So this is a tool that allows you to go through all of this stuff. We will, I think we'll just leave it there as a tool.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but really interesting. If you're interested in this and want to dig into it, there's a little bit more here in terms of a very systematic way to go through creating personas for people that are not you.
That's correct.
Yeah.
The curb cut effect.
Oh, yeah.
What is this?
Yeah. I think that if I'm remembering correctly, this was sort of a story about how to be able to make sidewalks accessible, there was this, okay, we have to be able to cut out part of this curb so that wheelchairs can run up them. But then it also turns out that baby strollers can go up them and shopping carts can go up them. And there's all of a sudden all of these other things that we didn't even think of when we're trying to open up the door for accessibility. Wow, oh my gosh, now I'm really realizing my bike goes up that thing, you know.
What are the little bumps on the yellow for?
Oh yeah.
Because when you cut the curve, what happens to blind people?
Oh yeah.
They walk right out into traffic.
Feel it. Yeah.
So there's so basically this is a very multi-use thing, which is very useful, and it doesn't impact regular people at all.
Nobody is put out by this, and many people, their lives are a little bit easier. There's all of the things that we wanted to do with software to make it better.
Usability, we talked a little bit about this with the VPAT thing, but the other thing is, you watch real users use the software, and then you say, why did you do that? How did you accomplish that task? Oh. And they'll say, well, I had to do it this way and this way and this way and this way. So we won't get to that in this course because we're not going to have a lot of users, but it is something that in the future you should ask for. Say, can we actually watch a user use our software?
Yeah, and I've seen these user studies done, and specifically one thing to keep in mind is you need to have ethics in place to actually conduct user studies because you have to show that you won't do harm to your users. Mm-hmm. The idea that you're able to collect an enormous amount of data, I mean, you can certainly do it by instrumenting the software to see what users are doing, but really to look at humans as they're interacting with the software, absolutely fascinating, really interesting thing to do. We don't have time to do it, but please remember that you're designing this spreadsheet for teachers.
Teachers and teenagers.
This to me is really important.
Yeah. Again, this is more like there's a whole bunch of testing. We talked about unit testing, we talked about acceptance testing, and then usability. But at the end of the day, we're writing software for people, a whole bunch of different types of people. And you want to know because just because you wrote the code and passed the unit tests doesn't mean that it's actually.
Although as engineers, it's easy to go, yes, it's a success because I got 100% coverage on
Well, we know that Volkswagen passed the unit tests, right? But that didn't mean that their code. And so basically, one of the ways that does this, and every time you go to Amazon, you're probably part of an A/B testing.
Oh, is that right?
Every single part of the Amazon webpage is being A/B tested.
Wow.
And what you do is you show the color of the buy button is optimized based on A/B testing.
Wow.
It's the color that is most likely to lead to a conversion into purchase on Amazon.
Is it really causal?
They have numbers that indicate that
it's really high.
It's high correlation.
High correlation, not necessarily causal. Yeah, it doesn't cause me to click buy, but I certainly will love the color of that button.
And so basically the whole idea is you can actually do A/B testing without doing the whole user testing and the ethics and all that stuff because you could just you've got a product, people are using it, and then you can see which one is better. If I put the buy button in the lower, if everything's monochrome, whatever, all of this stuff can be measured. And as long as your measurement is, this testing is very good at single variable testing.
Yeah.
Multivariable testing is very difficult.
Yeah.
That's where you need to have the more complicated user testing.
Yeah.
And so this is all of the stuff that goes into building a user testing. There's statistics at the end of it, and then you have to make a decision as to whether you're going to accept it there.
Yeah.
With great power comes great responsibility. You're writing code. Anticipate, try. Like you cannot anticipate that people are going to do things with your software, but do the exercise of trying to think, where could this go wrong?
Oh my gosh. And especially, I think that everyone in the class really showed, and I feel like some of it is the background of aligners. They really have that broader way of looking at things in a big picture scenario.
Yeah.
My choosing a default for this number that makes no sense whatsoever could possibly have negative consequences.
But the customer always gets a number.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And
I don't know what your problem is with this, Yvonne. They get a number.
They get a number, and it's.
Are you telling me we should just give them no data if we have no data?
Well, I think that if we start with that whole, let me be as accurate as I can, and sort of go with not a number.
Yeah. I don't have no information available.
Yeah. I remember. You're going to love this. I remember when people were talking about the evolution of the web, and at that time, the systems community really wanted it to be very much like a big distributed file system. And nobody liked at the very beginning of this stuff, nobody liked the idea that there were going to be 404 errors.
Yeah.
Like, you can't give that to a user.
No.
That's not what you do. That's not how you write software. Right? And the systems community, and I can come up with lots of examples of this, was like, this is never going to work. You can't give an error. Hi, it's fine. Users can deal. At that level, you want to say that you don't have an answer.
Right. And when you come up with your final project for your enhancements to the spreadsheet, we're going to ask you to think about this.
Yeah.
And maybe I think we'll add personas to the final project.
I would like that a lot because as a teacher, I feel like I've met a lot of different types of teachers and students and learners, and you want to be encouraging to these teenagers to learn more. And when they have an error, you want to, there's a lot of things that you think about that don't go into the implementation maybe, but you're trying to conjure up what this person is going to react like. Mm-hmm. And if the reaction that they have is actually negative because they're having a bad experience with your software, you want to be able to identify that. And it's not that you have to fix it and make it perfect for the world, but you want to try to anticipate those things.
And that's it for this week.
Oh my gosh, it's so exciting.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay.
Thank you once again. We will wrap this up. Well, of course, we'll wrap it up. You will see that after I wrap it up. But please watch this. And again, we're going to add go find a place where you think software has hurt people or
enforce biases.
Bias in software. It could be from your home country. It can be from a video game. It can be from anywhere where you think something is being a bias, where unintended consequences happen. Maybe you don't understand it. Bring it to your team in class, and we're going to have a lively discussion again.
I love it.
Okay.
Oh, so good. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. This is very fun.